Do you love spy books, movies, and TV? Then the Spybrary podcast is for you.
Hello and welcome to Spybrary. This is your host, Shane Whaley. Thank you for joining us. This is the first episode of 2026, and my guest and I would like to wish you all a happy, safe, and prosperous 2026. We hope you got tons of spy books and DVDs over the holiday, and you've got plenty to read in 2026. Today, we are revisiting a favorite format. So many of you have emailed in saying, can we have more Dead Drop 5 episodes? So for those of you who are new to Spybrary, first of all, welcome. This is where our brave guests find themselves dispatched on a clandestine mission behind the Iron Curtain. We're sending them to East Berlin, where danger lurks at every shadowy corner. But fear not, they're not embarking on this perilous journey unequipped. Our intrepid agents are allowed to request 5 spy books to be stashed in the East Berlin Dead Drop. And that's not all. Besides these spy books, our guest is granted a selection of diverse items, each carefully curated to make their stay in East Berlin more manageable, perhaps even a touch more comfortable. So get ready to dive into Dead Drop 5, but be warned, this series can seriously damage your bank account because there's tons of recommendations in these episodes, and you can actually go back and listen and watch some of the archive, and that's at spybrary.com/Dead Drop 5. Today we welcome Bryan Boling from the state of Kentucky. How are you, sir?
I am good, sir. How are you?
I'm really excited. I'm excited to dive into your picks, but even more excited to introduce you to our Spybrary audience, because you've gone through the Sarrett School of Podcast Training. You have stepped up to be a guest host. And some of you may remember at the end of last year, I put the call out for guest hosts to come and support us with Spybrary, because with all, it was such a bumper year for spy books, both history and fiction last year, that it's really hard to get to them all. And I know we want to talk with more authors on the show. So I asked for some guest hosts, and Bryan stepped up. He's already completed his first mission. He's interviewed Dave Goodman. Many of you will know Dave, who wrote A Reluctant Spy. That interview will be coming out soon. But I thought it would be a really good idea to interrogate Bryan on Dead Drop 5, so we could find out a bit more about the spy novels and the spy history books that he really enjoys. So welcome to Spybrary, Bryan.
Thanks. I'm ready. I'm wired up to the polygraph and set to go.
Well, right. So this is your request to your handler. You get 5 spy book picks. What's the first pick you would like to request?
So when you said 5, I thought, just 5? And my wife will tell you that I am indecisive on the best of days. And if you ask me what's my favorite anything, you're going to get 10 answers. So I thought what I would do, instead of just picking 5 random that I think are my current favorites or whatever, is I would sort of categorize things. And I thought we'd start off with a nonfiction.
Mm-hmm.
And for my nonfiction book, this was tough. All these choices are tough.
Yes.
This was tough. But what was not tough was picking an author. The first nonfiction author that sprung to my mind was Ben McIntyre. And from there, it became tough. Because I've read a bunch of books by him, and all of them are fabulous. Stuff, everything from historical, well, they're kind of all historical, but from World War II through the Cold War, and even up to a book that I read of his not long ago, The Siege, about the 1980 siege of the Iranian embassy in London. Kind of very spy adjacent, I guess, but yes. A subject that as an American has weirdly fascinated me for most of my life. But what I ended up picking, and it was tough. What I ended up picking was a great book of his called Operation Mincemeat. Now, Operation Mincemeat, if you've not read this or heard of it, it's a true story, right? It's nonfiction. But it is the story of one of these great World War II tricks, right? This is what I love about World War II espionage, are these very creative ways that the Allies tricked the Axis. The most famous, of course, is the double cross program, where they captured all the German spies and then pretended to be them, sending false information back to the Nazis. But this one is a little less well known. But I picked it because, one, I have a fascination with World War II, and like I said, a fascination with this sort of espionage operation. But also, I got this book. I went to London last year for the first time, and I went to the Imperial War Rooms, the Churchill bunkers, in downtown in London. And if you've not had a chance to go, it's fascinating to get to see where Churchill ran the war, where a lot of these meetings took place. And as I was leaving, I was in the gift shop, and I'm not a big gift shop guy. My wife will tell you that I bring horrible souvenirs back from trips because I'm always like, I don't need more stuff. But there was a book section, and I can always getting more books.
Yes.
And I came across this book and bought it there, read it on the flight home. Couldn't put it down. It's a fascinating story.
And were you aware of the story before you visited the war rooms, or was this new to you?
No, surprisingly, this was a new one on me.
Yeah.
I had not heard of it. It's a fascinating idea. And this is, like I said, this is one of the things that I love about the World War II stories is you get these guys, most of these guys that are running MI6 and the OSS and the SOE, they're just regular guys, right? Because there wasn't such a thing for the most part as professional, at least in the States, right? The OSS, there was no professional espionage. In the UK, you have SIS and the MI6 going back a long ways, but it ramps up so much, like everything else in World War II. Everything ramped up so much that you were pulling people out of normal lives, and so you get these guys who are like college professors or, crossword puzzle enthusiasts or whatever, who end up becoming these super spy masters, and they come up with some of the most original, innovative ideas ever.
Yeah. I mean, I say this all the time on the show. Spy fact is often stranger than spy fiction. If you'd watch Mincemeat in a fictional movie, you might, or in a book, you might kind of raise your eyebrow. But and I remember reading Christopher Andrews' Defense of the Realm, which is the authorized history of MI5. It's a right doorstop of a book, and I'm like, gosh, if I was a writer, I'd be all over this book, because the escapades he writes about, they do sound stranger than fiction, So I agree with you. So in terms of Mincemeat, what was the operation about? What can you break down for us?
Yeah, so it's this great story. They came up with this idea. So again, kind of like the double cross, kind of like the ghost army that Patton commanded in East Anglia to try and lure people away from the real objective. This was leading up to Operation Husky, the American invasion, or the Allied invasion of Sicily, right? And so they're trying to convince the Germans that the invasion is going to come in Greece instead of Sicily. And so they think, okay, well, so what we need to do is we need to feed them some false information. And, like any good spy knows, you believe something a lot more if you have to work for it. Something that's handed to you seems too easy. And so they came up with this idea. They were going to drop a body in the ocean, dressed as a British officer. He's going to wash up on the beach, and in his briefcase chained to his wrist are going to be teasing information, right? Again, you can't just give them the whole thing. They have to kind of figure it out, but leading them to an invasion is coming in Greece, with the idea that they would put a lot of their forces in Greece and the Balkans, and then when the Allies landed in Sicily, they would encounter less resistance. So they do this. They come up with this idea, and it sounds crazy at first, but the story itself is even crazier with all of the details, things that even I hadn't even thought of, that you have to figure out, like, where do you find this body, right? Yeah. It can't just be anybody. It has to be someone who could legitimately pass for a British military officer, who died. And how did they die, right? Because presumably somebody may do an autopsy on this person and find out that they were killed by, cholera or whatever. Yeah. That doesn't make sense. So they have to put all this together, and then they have to create a life for this guy. And this is one of the other things I love about spy thrillers in general, but World War II and any of this sort of, I'm reading a great book called The Illegals right now, all about KGB operatives under deep illegal cover, and the backstories that have to be created, right? You can't just go out and be, Joe American. You have to have a backstory, right? Because people are going to ask you questions and things are going to come up. And so, like, this character that they created, this Royal Marine officer, he has to have stuff in his pockets that he would normally carry if you were a guy flying on a trip, right? He has a picture of his girlfriend. He has letters from her. He has, notes about his home life and stuff. All these things that make him more believable.
Yeah. And what is it about McIntyre's writing that you enjoy so much?
So I should say that my first college degree is in history. And I am a history guy. I love history. The reason I have a degree in history is a real dumb reason, to be honest. I was in school, kind of didn't know what I was going to do with my life. And someone told me, pick something you enjoy that's a good kind of well-rounded liberal arts type thing and study that, and it'll open lots of doors for you. And that's not true. History really opened no doors for me. I couldn't get a job. But what it did give me was the ability to read a lot really fast. We read so much when I studied and write. I would crank out 10, 15, 20-page papers over a weekend. And it gave me the ability to sort of think critically and analyze stuff. But I really enjoy history. But to be honest with you, a lot of historians are hard to read.
Yes.
Right. We were talking before, we started recording about reading for pleasure. And I saw a meme one time that said, the fact that there's something called reading for pleasure implies that there is also reading for pain. And that's called graduate school. And it's somewhat true, right? A lot of historians and stuff, it's just not, it's something you go, okay, I have to get through this because I'm interested in the topic or it's required or whatever. But McIntyre's writing reads like fiction.
Yes.
It reads like a thriller. It's very fast paced. Like I said, I read this book, I think, on the flight home from London, in one sitting.
I absolutely agree. All of his books like that, to a point where and I think this is why he is so successful commercially as well, is you don't have to be a history geek to actually pick up one of his books and really enjoy them, because they do read this narrative nonfiction, basically, isn't it? And it's the same with The Siege, and he's very good at taking that one instance. You said taking that one instance, and here you've got the big decoy of wrong footing the Nazis. But as you say, it's the whole, well, we can't just drop that on the beach. We have to build up this backstory. And then you could imagine and I don't want to go into the book too much because we hope people go and read it, but that whole, how do you even get that approved?
Yeah.
That operation that sounds so wacky, how to get it improved. And I think that's where McIntyre is very talented.
Yeah, and he's a talented writer, but he's a historian. He's a good historian. The first book I never heard of him before. My wife got me several years ago for Christmas, A Spy Among Friends, which was the book I almost chose for this. Yeah. And that's another great one about Kim Philby and sort of the last days of his before his escape. But I read it.
Remarkable, isn't it, when you think about We Let Him Go, right? It's just, sorry if no one's read the book or knows the history.
Yeah, spoiler alert. But yeah, so I read it, and I remember I looked him up because I was like, this guy's phenomenal. Where is he a professor? And I assumed he was a history professor because it reads like legitimate history.
Yes.
And when I looked up, I was a little surprised to find out that he's got a journalism background. Because as someone who's read a lot of historians, for academics, he sounds like an academic historian.
Yeah, because even Christopher Andrews' book, I know Christopher listens occasionally, so I'll be careful with my words, but it's not an easy read. It's not an easy read. First of all, it's a doorstopper, but it's not an easy read. It's not the one I would hand somebody. It would generally be a McIntyre book. Richard Kerbach is also worth a shout out. I had him as one of my books of last year, which was The Defector, which is the story of Oleg Lyell. It's impossible to be as good, I think, as McIntyre with narrative nonfiction, but he was also of that mold. So it's good to see more historians doing that, because hopefully it will get more people to come in and read the history. So that is an excellent pick for a Dead Drop 5. Anything else you want to say about that one before we move on to pick number 2?
No, like I said, I think it's worth reading. They made a movie out of it, actually, with Colin Firth, and the movie's good. I think it's worth watching. I would read the book first. Yes. There's so much more in the book. It's one of those things, like you said, truth is stranger than fiction. There's so much packed in there that you think they've put too much into this story. If this was fiction, you'd go, you got to cut the fact that his brother is the guy who brought ping pong to the United Kingdom. What a random fact. And I'm going to just leave it at that. And people are going to be going, what? So go read the book and you'll find all about how ping pong plays a role in World War II espionage. So.
Well, there's also a play. There's a theatre
yeah?
adaptation that I think Jeff Quest went to see. I think he left us a review, actually. You check that in the log. But yeah, I missed it, unfortunately. Otherwise, I would have gone to see it. I think it was in New York and in the West End in London as well. So again, because it's such an interesting story.
Yeah, it's fascinating.
All right, let's move on to your second pick, Bryan.
All right, so my second pick, I decided I'm going to pick a classic. And so I'm going to define classic as being older than me, right? A book that came out before I was born. So that's a little challenging now that I'm, 50. But this is a book that I don't think actually came out. It might have. I don't remember the date it came out. It takes place before I was born. So when I was a kid, I, really got into spy fiction originally from these dime store novels. I don't know if you had this experience growing up, but there was this little strip mall near our house and there was this drugstore, and in the drugstore there was this rickety little rack, one of those little spinning racks of paperbacks. And every time we had to go to the drugstore for anything, I would go over and browse this rack and beg my mom to get one of these books. And it was usually like a $3.99 little paperback that was, looking back now, you go, that was probably so bad, right? Yeah. But as a 8-year-old kid, they were so engrossing. And I remember my grandparents, both my grandfathers served in World War II. Neither of them talked much about it, of course, as that generation kind of was. But my mom's dad was career Army, enlisted as a 17-year-old for World War II, retired at the rank of major after being a prisoner of war in Korea. So I was always fascinated with the military, World War II, that kind of era. And I remember being at their house one time, and they had some books laying around, and one of them was the Odessa File by Frederick Forsyth. And I remember picking it up and reading it, and I couldn't have been, 12, 13 years old, something like that. And just being fascinated with this idea that there were Nazis still around, hiding out. And of course, it's not just totally fiction, right? This is based on real stuff. There's lots of books out there like this, The Boys from Brazil being one that was made into a movie. Robert Ludlum wrote a book called The Holcroft Covenant. It kind of deals with the same thing. But I think the Odessa File is sort of to me, it's the sort of penultimate to the touchstone of this genre. And I will say, I think it holds up. I reread it last year, and we were talking earlier. I said a lot of these sort of authors that we think of as classic authors from the 60s, 70s, and even early 80s, you go back and read them now, and you go, I don't know if they're as good as I thought they were back then. But I think this one holds up.
So what can you share with us about the main plot of Odessa, for those who aren't familiar? Written by Frederick Forsyth, of course, the late, great Freddie Forsyth.
Yeah, so the main plot is there's a guy named Peter Miller, and he is a journalist in West Germany. And he stumbles upon this diary one night. It's the night that Kennedy is assassinated, and that I think that's just put in there for a historical touch point, because it really doesn't bear anything on the story. But he stumbles across, he's a reporter, he's out chasing stories. And he runs into a scene where there's lots of police, and he knows one of the cops, and they start talking. And it's this old man he's killed himself. It's just a suicide. It's not a big deal. And he kind of, oh, that's interesting, thanks. And he leaves. And then the cop friend calls him up and says, I have something for you that I found in this guy's house, and I think it might make a good story. And he gives him his diary, and it's his diary of his time in the concentration camps in Riga. And so the first good third of the book is this diary, right? And like I said, I've always been fascinated with World War II, and particularly with the Holocaust. If you get the chance to go to the Holocaust Museum in D.C., it's a fascinating experience. I actually avoided it for a long time. I'm in D.C. a lot, and I've done all those museums multiple times, and actually put this one off quite a bit, because I thought it's going to be too sad. It's going to be too depressing. And it's really not. I mean, there's some sadness to it, right? It's the Holocaust. But it's just a fascinating place. And so he tells of his stories in the camp. And if you've ever seen the movie Life is Beautiful, it's what I thought of when I reread it. The Roberto Benigni movie from several years ago that won an Oscar. It reminded me of that. That's sort of what were things really like. But he tells this horrible story, and it ends with the commandant of the camp is this horrible guy who escapes. Right? He ends up not facing justice, and he's never seen again. And so Peter Miller decides that he's going to hunt this guy down. He's going to find him and bring him to justice. And in the course of this, he discovers that there is a shadowy group called Odessa that is an organization that supports former SS people who are on the run now. Because at the time, this is the 60s, Israel was becoming a strong nation for the first time, and the Mossad and the Israeli Defense Force, they're actively searching for these guys.
Yes.
Like I said, based on true story, Adolf Eichmann, they snagged in South America and drug him back to Israel for trial. You read lots of stories about this. They were actively hunting these guys down. Simon Wiesenthal, who actually is a character in the book, is out there, and he's hunting these guys. And the West German government is hunting these guys. And so the Odessa exists to sort of help them hide, but also there's a little undercurrent of, and then one day. Then one day we'll be back.
Yes. It's kind of similar to Quiller as well, that we recently reviewed on Section F, the Quiller Memorandum movie. That's also set in the 60s, but based about the resurgence of neo-Nazis, and a lot more stronger than you would think. So it does seem like that was a bit of a theme in the 60s with some of these books.
Yeah, and the thing that I didn't notice it the first time I read it, right? Because I was a kid and I was just mainly hung up in the idea that we're going to hunt Nazis and get them, right? But what I noticed when I went back last year and reread it, there is a sadness to it too, because everywhere this guy goes, he runs into people telling him to stop, and it's not always who you think. Right. Obviously, if you run into people who are connected to this movement, they're going to say, you better not dig into this. You better not dig into this. But he runs into normal Germans who say, nobody wants this. Nobody wants you to hunt these guys down. And I remember even as a kid, when I learned about how some of this stuff went down, I was just like, I don't understand why. I remember reading about this and thinking, well, there must be like a huge group at the FBI or something that's hunting these guys too, and finding out that there's not. It's a small office. Most of these Nazi hunters back in the 60s were a handful of people, other than Israel, right? A handful of people who had no budget, they had no staff, and I'm like, I don't understand. These guys are the worst people in history. Why are we not hunting these guys? And that really comes through in the book, in this idea that nobody wants to know more about this.
Yeah.
We want it to be done, and we want to move on. And I think I see a parallel in a lot of things in the United States when we talk about our past. We talk about things like slavery. We talk about things like the treatment of Native Americans. And we go, yes, it was all very bad, but let's move on.
Yeah.
Because nobody really wants to know the bad things about their own past.
And it's interesting, with my East Germany geeks hat on, they as a government were one of the very few that were public in, they went to great lengths to identify former Nazis that were working in the West German government. And there was a English language newspaper they published, Democratic German Report. And I'm lucky if I've got quite a few years worth here. I told you I was a geek. And yeah, most of those are about outing people in West Germany that had a Nazi past. But for me, they were the only, other than Israel, as you say, they were the only ones really that were kind of outing these people. And when you look at the Gehlen organization, Richard Gehlen himself was, a former Nazi and was involved with the Abwehr, and he was turned. Then you have Werner von Braun, right? Wasn't it, with the rocket program? So, yeah, it's a fascinating part of history. And in terms of the genre, I mean, for you, where do you, if you look at the spectrum of, actioneer on one side, a very kinetic kind of thriller, and then the more cerebral, realistic on the other side of that spectrum? Where would you place Odessa?
Gosh, that's tough because I think it's got elements of both. I think it's a little bit more towards the cerebral, realistic. It's not as much, there's chases, there's danger, but there's not like gunfights and a lot of the special ops stuff like we see now with like things like people like Jack Carr, or even some of the later, especially Tom Clancy kind of novels where it's very kind of military more so than espionage. I think this is definitely a more espionage book, but it's fast paced and actiony as well.
Yeah. So you're watching him on the case. It's almost like a detective, really, is
Yeah.
From what I remember.
Yeah, it is. That's a good way to put it. It's almost more like a crime story because he's a detective investigating this. And there is a twist at the end that I won't give away that really gets into Peter Miller's motivation that it's the one quibble I have with the book. I think it is a more realistic way to deal with it. But to me, I liked the idea that this guy is saying, because all throughout the book, people say, why do you want to drag up the past? And he says, because this man is part of what is bad about Germany, and I'm a proud German, and I want to make things right. And I think, God, I love that, right? I love this idea. The Night Manager, John le Carré, his book, Jonathan Pine, the main character, he says the same thing. He says, talking about why do you want to hunt down Richard Roebuck? He says, because when you're British and there's a man who's British who's making everybody's life miserable, you want to stop it. And I like this idea that this guy is just patriotic about his country. And he says, I don't like people making my country look bad.
Interesting.
So I really like that motivation. It turns out that there's more to it than that.
Yeah.
That I won't get into because it is a little bit of a twist. But
and it's interesting you mentioned le Carré there, because of course he wrote A Small Town in Germany, which is also about the resurgence of a nationalist movement. Although they were more in the public eye, they weren't hunting them down. I mean, but they were, a lot of authors were riffing off this theme because it's hard for us. I'm the same age as you, and it's hard for us to imagine sometimes in the 60s. You're only 20 years away from Second World War. That's like you and I talking about something in 2005. It's that recent. And, to us, it's just like a block of history. So I don't know if it's the same for you. Definitely for me, I don't always remember how close the 60s was to the Second World.
Yeah, and that's a good point. And that's something. So I'm reading this book I said about the illegals, and I'm at this point right now where it's taking place in the 60s. This is nonfiction. And they're talking about these Soviet agents that they're infiltrating to the West and into East Germany, and then and then to West Germany. And they talk about the proximity to the war and how a lot of these guys, their parents have hatred for Germans because of what the Germans did to the Soviets during World War II. And it struck me, like you said, that, yeah, my gosh, I feel like history, we don't think about as a continuum. So we think of it as discrete pockets. And we forget that, yeah, the Cold War really was just an extension of World War II. Yeah. And so a lot of these people, I think growing up in the 80s and 90s, right, I see West Germany as they're a great ally of ours, but one generation back, they were the biggest enemy we've ever had prior to the Soviet Union.
And I certainly remember as a kid, late 80s, even as a teenager, that, with Margaret Thatcher and the European Union, or the EEC as it was then, people were like, oh, you can't trust the Germans. You can't let the Germans take over. We've been here before. Even then, it was something that was talked about a lot. You couldn't trust the Germans.
Yeah. Yeah, I remember a quote from Dave Barry, who's an American humorist I used to love when I was a kid. And he had a whole travel book that he wrote one time. And he was talking about different countries. And he said, Germany is a country that's full of wonderfully lovely people who every few years decide to take over the world.
Yeah.
And like I said, as a kid in the 80s, I go, yeah, that kind of resonated just because I was into history. But I feel like now people would be like, I don't know what you're talking about. Yeah. That's a different era.
And es tut mir leid zu Deutsche zu hören. And I apologize to our German listeners. We're not anti-German. I love the German language, etc. I love to visit you. We're talking about the historical perspective here from our youth. There is a sequel out to Odessa File, isn't there? Have you got
There
around to
is.
reading that?
I'm
Toby
halfway
Kent.
through it right now, actually.
How's that going?
It's good. It's different. I don't want to pass judgment till I'm done with it, because I feel like a lot of times I've read books that right up until the end I love, and then it just falls apart, or vice versa. I go, oh, this is not doing it for me, and then at the end it kind of all comes together. So, but I will say it's written by it's the authorship is Frederick Forsyth and I apologize, I can't remember
Tony
the other
Kent.
Tony Kent, yeah, and I'm often leery of these because I find that a lot of times you have an author who maybe they've died, like Tom Clancy. I was a huge Tom Clancy fan in middle school and high school, and after he died, they're still publishing Tom Clancy books that are kind of ghost written by other people, and I've picked up a couple and found that they're just not nearly as good. And then sometimes you have like James Patterson. He's not spy, but a thriller writer who has co-written books now with everyone I can think of. And I think a lot of times it becomes a marketing gimmick almost, or something like that. And maybe they're good, maybe they're not. Maybe they're kind of like those drugstore novels that I used to pick up. But so far this one is really good. And I kind of wondered how they were going to do it, because I'm like, you're really far removed from World War II now. There's no, I'm thinking any Nazis that are around are in their 90s, right? And it just doesn't seem like you can write an action adventure chasing a nonagenarian around Europe, right? I feel like you catch him in 2 seconds. But they have a really nice twist on it with the rise of sort of what we've seen lately, especially here in the US and also in the UK, I guess too, of nationalism. And fundamentally at its heart, Nazism was about nationalism. So white supremacy kind of.
I read mixed reviews of the sequel, which is one of the reasons I haven't got to it yet, but it's definitely on my list to get to this year, because Vive la Défense, with the community, we don't always agree on what we enjoy. So I'm curious to read that one. But do you think, because my issue with that was, before I read the sequel, I wanted to read. I felt, should I read the Odessa File again? Because it's been so long since I read that. Do you recommend that, or do you think it's
do? Yeah. I'm glad that I had recently reread the Odessa File, because they reference it. Spoiler alert: Peter Miller is a character in the new book. He's an old man. And they talk about some stuff like that. They do a good job. I think if you've not read the Odessa File, you're not going to be totally lost, right? If you have an idea what the Odessa File is about, it's not a direct sequel in the sense of if the Odessa File had come out in 2015 or 2020 and this came out this year. I think the author understands that we're talking about a 60-year-old book, right? And so it's going to need some fleshing out. So I think he explains enough of it that if you haven't read Odessa, you won't be lost, but I think you will get more out of it if you are up to speed on things.
I will definitely do that then. Marvelous. Let's move on to your third pick.
So my third category, I told you I'm a history guy, is historical fiction. And I'm kind of parsing these a little bit. They're my category, so I can kind of define them how I want.
Absolutely.
A lot of people would say, well, isn't the Odessa File historical fiction? And I go, no, because it was written at the time it takes place. It is historical fiction now because it's written about something that happened 60 years ago. But I'm going to call historical fiction something that was written about something that happened before it was written. Does that make sense? That's a weird way to describe it. But and one of my favorite historical fiction authors in general, and specifically in this sort of genre, is Ken Follett. Again, he's another guy I got into in the World War II stuff. Hornet Flight, Jackdaws, a lot of these are about kind of operations behind enemy lines in World War II, spy/secret special operations type stuff. But really everything I've read by the guy, I think is really great. One of my favorites of his, it is nothing to do with spies, is the Century series. And if you're a history guy, you'll like this. It's 3 books that cover from the turn of the 20th century, 1900, to the present. I think the last thing in the last book is the election of Barack Obama. And it follows a couple of families from England and Russia and other places through all these historical eras. And it's fascinating. But I really had a hard time with this one. Once I picked Follett, I was going to pick Eye of the Needle. This is a book I've read so many times, I could probably quote it to you. It's a great World War II story. Again, another good German spy infiltrating the UK, and two seemingly regular guys who have been tasked with, now they work for British intelligence and they have to find this guy. It's a great story. And I almost picked it, but because I went with Mincemeat for my nonfiction, I was like, well, let's go away from World War II and let's pick another book by Follett that I've read a couple of times that I like for different reasons, and that's The Man from St. Petersburg.
Okay.
So The Man from St. Petersburg takes place in a time period that when I read it the first time, I did not know much about. So when I did my history degree, my program said you have to pick a focus, and your focus can be geographical, it could be time, it could be both. And so I kind of picked 20th century America / Europe. Mostly I was focused on World War II and the Cold War, right?
Yeah.
Predictably, as a spy guy.
It's still huge, right?
It's still a huge area, right?
Yeah.
And so outside of those areas, I did have to take a couple of classes. They said you can't just do all that. You have to have so many from outside. So I took a British history class that covered, basically the entire history of England and the United Kingdom from 1066 forward,
Wow.
which you can imagine was super not in depth.
Yeah.
I took a Middle Eastern history class, kind of the same thing, right? The history of the Middle East from 900 AD to the present. But mostly it was these kind of focused on America and Europe in the 20th century. And even though I did that, I sort of, like I said, started around 1930. And so anything prior to 1930, I didn't know a whole lot about. World War I has always just been this kind of like, yeah, there was a war, and it's the reason we have World War II, right? That's the real reason behind World War I was to make World War II the sequel. But when you really get into it, World War I is fascinating, and the early 20th century. And we were talking about, I mentioned about, think about history in discrete packets, and it's really not. And just as to understand the Cold War, you have to understand World War II. I think to understand World War II, you have to understand World War I. And we can keep going back, right? You have to be able to understand the Napoleonic Wars and so forth back. But I think understanding World War I and the events that led up to it, including the Russian Revolution of 1917, including the rise and fall of the Weimar Republic in Germany, all of that plays into setting the stage for what's going to happen in the 30s. And this is a book that when I was in London, I walked around, particularly around Westminster and up by the Mall and Buckingham Palace area. And these are places that feature prominently in the Man from St. Petersburg, and just trying to imagine what things looked like back then.
So when was it set?
It's set in the just prior to World War I. And so there's still a Tsar in Russia. There's still, a Kaiser in Germany. And I don't remember. It's actually been a while. I meant to go back and sort of review it or reread it in preparation for this, because it has been a while since I've read it. But I've read it a couple of times, and I think I can get the gist of it. But it's set in the I want to say the 19-teens, to maybe just before the 19-teens.
Got it. And what's the central premise? What's the plot? What are we looking
so
at?
it's set in London, and it follows this family, this quasi nobility family. The dad is kind of a bigwig, enough that he knows the king, right? He's not like landed gentry really, but he's important, and mainly focuses on his daughter. And his daughter is this typical kind of teenage girl. She's getting ready to come out at a debutante ball and be presented to the king and queen. So, like I said, they're in society enough that she's going to go to Buckingham Palace for her coming out. And this family, and the mom, the guy's wife, is Russian, and she's a kind of a Russian immigrant. So they have Russian family, and it's just kind of about their lives. And the thing that sort of happens that really sets this off is this guy from the man from St. Petersburg shows up, and he is a Bolshevik Russian revolutionary who is intent on doing something for the cause, striking a blow against the bourgeois swine. Yes. And so he decides he's going to try to kill this Earl, this guy whose daughter whose daughter features prominently. And he decides to get at the Earl by approaching the daughter. And so he encounters her one night randomly, and they sort of strike up a friendship. He lies a little bit about who he is, but not a lot. She knows he's not fancy. He's not, noble. But he kind of tells her what she wants to hear. And in that respect, it's a lot like every other kind of teen romance, right? This girl, she kind of wants to rebel against her family. Her dad is driving her crazy. She doesn't like the idea of being just a fancy girl in a party dress. And so sneaking around with this guy feels dangerous. It's never really romantic for either of them, right? He's not seducing her. He's just sort of, he is seducing her intellectually, right? He's trying to convince her that communism is the way, and that and she's starting to buy it, right? She's starting to think, this is great. And then they discover a big twist that I won't give away. But it changes everybody's approach to everything.
That's very intriguing. And in terms of intelligence agencies, bearing in mind when that was set, who are we looking at? Who are the major players in this?
So I'd have to think back, and I may be wrong. So if somebody pulls it out and I'm lying to you, it's not intentional. But I think it is MI5 and MI6 that are involved. MI5 because he's this guy, he's in the country, and I think actually this Earl may be connected with them somehow. I think it's just because he's involved in the government, right? As back then, especially, a lot of kind of wealthy aristocratic people were, they were cabinet members or MPs or whatever.
And stylistically, for anyone who hasn't read Follett before, how would you describe his writing?
He is, again, kind of more towards the cerebral. There is action, but again, it's not over the top. It's not military in nature. Even in his World War II books, right, that tend to, Jackdaws is a good example about an SOE team operating behind lines in France. And there is some, sabotage, bombs, etc. But it's much more of like a mystery that you're trying to solve / a thriller. All of these stories are kind of, you're trying to figure out who's the bad guy, what's going on, what's the real thing here, what is the MacGuffin that we're trying to get, stopping some plot, etc.
Yes. Now, if you're listening to this or watching it and you don't have a pen to hand, or you're evading your tail, I would add all of these selections to today's episodes in the show notes. You can find at spybrary.com/dead-drop5. And now would be a good time to ask you, if you are watching this on YouTube, to drop us a like and a comment. Let us know what you think of the selections so far. What do you think of Follett's writing? And for those of you who are listening, we appreciate you too. And if you could leave us a rating and review, that helps Bryan and I spread the word and bring more spy readers in from the cold. Okay, so let's look at your fourth pick.
So my fourth and fifth, both are sort of the same category. And that's what I would call the newer fiction. And this is sort of the stuff that's come out in the last decade or so, and typically contemporary to the to its source, right? So it's written about things that were contemporary to the time it was written, and there are authors that are kind of newer. And I mentioned looking back at some of these sort of classic authors, and you go, some of it holds up and some of it doesn't. And one thing I'll say is, and this is almost heresy to say, like I'm hit or miss sometimes on Le Carre. I'll go back and read his books, and some of them I just can't put down. Some of them I have to really work for, and I go, man, the story is great. What an original idea. Everything is cool. The prose itself, maybe I'm not in love with at times, and I think that's maybe just a product of the time period, right? So writing in the 60s, the prose was different than what we see today. Etc.
I think I hear this from a lot of Spybrarians, and I'm not necessarily sure if it's just 60s, because I think it's just his style and how he wrote, and I think that's also why he appeals, I think, more to the, I know it's a snobby word to use, but the more literary side of fiction. I know a lot of people who read Le Carre that don't necessarily read spy as a genre, but love his writing. And I know loads of spy fans who just can't get on with it. So I think there is something stylistically, rather than the era it was written in.
Yeah. So some of these newer writers, I think, are the 21st century version of that, right? Their writing is a more updated, more modern style, maybe. But it's the same thing, right? The slow burn, the deep kind of intellectual feel of things. But for me personally, at least, I find it a little more accessible. So I had a hard time with this because there's so many. Charles Cumming, everything I've read by that guy is phenomenal. Dave McCloskey, same thing. I have not read The Persian yet. It's on my list, my ever-growing list. But I feel like these are some of the guys who I would call, the heirs to that sort of mantle of Le Carre and these guys from the 60s. But so I was like, gosh, well, who am I going to pick? And my first pick was something that it was a very unusual pick for me, because this is a book that I tried to read twice and could not get into, and then suddenly did. And I think the thing that changed for me was medium. So I love a good audiobook. I discovered audiobooks several years ago, and I started listening to them while I'm in my yard, while I work out, while I'm in the car, while I, whatever. And I get a lot of books read that way, right? And I used to think, and this is sort of cheating, I can't really count this as reading books, but I think it's become something that's much more acceptable.
Oh,
right?
You can. And also, sorry to interrupt, I asked Professor Penny Fielding, who's a professor of English literature at Edinburgh University, very prestigious uni, and she definitely says it can be counted as reading. So that's good enough for me.
Yeah. I've heard librarians say this too. So, and so this book had been super recommended to me over and over and over again. And I was like, great, I'm going to get it. I'm reading a book right now, but I just finished an audiobook. I usually have at least one audiobook and at least one regular book going at the same time.
Yeah.
So it's like, well, this will be my new audiobook. And I got it and I started listening to it and I thought, it's okay. Everybody seems to think it's great, but it's just okay. And I kind of got a little ways into it and was just like, I'm going to move on to something else. And so I did, and I moved on. But then I keep reading, and I even when I first got involved with Spybrary, put out a request. Here's the people I love. Recommend me something. And this book came up over and over and over again. And I was like, I just don't like it. And fine, I'll give it another shot. And so I got it again on audiobook, and I got a little further in, and I was like, it's just not doing it for me. And I put it away, and I was like, I guess it's just one of those things that it's just not for everybody. I don't like it. And I think you and I had actually talked about this book too, and you had sort of said the same thing. It's just not for everybody. And I was like, you know what? I'm determined to at least make it through this book. I might not like it, but I'm going to make it through. And so I went and got a physical copy of it, and I sat down and could not put it down.
Incredible. What was the difference for you?
I don't know, but I guess I should spoil, because I don't think we've said it yet. It's The Peacock and the Sparrow by Spybrary.
Yes.
Award-winning book. Like I said, I don't know. I was like, am I missing something? I just can't get into this. It's not bad. It's just not doing it for me. And that third time when I picked up the held the printed book in my hands, couldn't stop reading it, couldn't put it down. It's one of my favorites now.
And that wasn't because it was a narrator that jarred with you at all, was it?
No, that's the thing. That's what I thought. Because sometimes I have had where I've put on an audiobook, maybe even of a book that I've already read years ago. And I'm like, I just want something kind of to have in the car. And I go, I can't.
Yeah.
It's, I'm kind of particular about audiobooks. I really just want you to read the book to me. I don't like a lot of drama.
Sure.
Behind, don't just read it flat like this in a monotone, but I can do without you trying to do the accents.
Right.
A little bit, maybe varying your voice between characters is fine, but and I really don't, as a rule, like music. When they have dramatic music playing behind their to really tell you this is dramatic. Pay attention.
I'm with you on that.
But this was not, right. This narrator was fine. I didn't have any issues with it. So I don't know. I don't know what it was. I don't know if it was that when I listen to an audiobook, I'm typically doing something else. And this is maybe a book that you just sort of have to sort of sit and focus on.
And what was it about? So when you got reading the story, what was it about the story that drew you in?
Again, I think it reminds me a lot of old school Le Carre, in that it's a slow burn, right? It's this mystery you're trying to solve. Who do you trust? Who do you believe? What's going on? And it's a lot of character development. It's a lot of learning who these people are, and trying to figure out what's going on. And
also, same for you, but the fact it was set in Bahrain, which was a region I knew very little about. And actually, I had to look it up on the map. Even though I consider myself quite good at geography, I had to remind myself exactly where it was. I know very little about Bahrainian history.
Yeah, same. Like I said, I took a Middle Eastern history class in college, but like I said, it was basically the history of everything from Morocco to Iran over 1,000 years. So I don't even think we mentioned Bahrain. And I do like the fact that it is someplace different. Even if it's not necessarily that I like Bahrain, it's just different. So much of what I read and so much of what I think is popular is out there is Europe.
Yes.
That anything outside of Europe, and don't get me wrong, I love Europe. And that's a great place to set these. But anything that's just a little different, I think, is interesting to me.
Yeah, and of course it's set to the backdrop of the Arab Spring. So that made it topical as well. You had that backdrop. And also I think from my own reading with Ilana's background, former CIA, served in the Middle East. I mean, that kind of authenticity came through. And, we talk about scenes that stand out, and the scenes that kind of stand out for me from that book are not actually to do with the spy story, but it was her observation or the character's observation of embassy life as a foreign diplomat, and then we're singing, I think, Rod Stewart songs on karaoke and getting blind drunk every Friday night on the compound and things like that. It adds that. There's you're getting that. We're spies. We're peeking into that world, which, I don't know a great deal about.
Yeah, I did like that. I got the same sort of thing from Dave McCloskey's book, Damascus Station. Has a little bit of that, too, of the kind of just what it's like working in the office of a CIA station. That's sort of like, it's not James Bond. It's not Jason Bourne. It's not running around the world, shooting things and blowing things up and meeting in dark alleys. It's filing papers and knowing the combination to the safe. And like you said, singing karaoke at office Christmas parties.
Yeah.
And I just think that's a really nice touch.
Yeah, and it's interesting with I.S. Berry because she exploded onto the scene, and she came on my radar through people in Spybrary that had read it, and I think it was Paul Vidic, the author, actually said you need to get on this. But she scooped up the majority of the prestigious debut awards as well. So, she now has that challenge. I don't envy her of this. She's got her second one, I think, comes out later this year, and turning that one in, and the pressure on her is unbelievable. But we're rooting for you, Ilana. We know you can do this.
Yeah,
and, we're excited
I can't wait.
For your second book. All right, so let's move on to your fifth pick.
My fifth pick, again, another modern one, and again, this is another one I had a hard time getting into, and this is almost sacrilege to say about reading books. It was another Medium thing. I started reading the book. Couldn't quite get into it. It was highly recommended to me. And then I watched it on TV. And suddenly I was hooked. I couldn't stop watching it. And so I went back and got the book again, and then I couldn't put the book down. And in this case, it's a series of books, and I picked one just sort of representative of them. It's not necessarily my favorite, least favorite, whatever. It's just sort of representative. And that's the Slow Horses series by McCarran.
So my question for you is, when you started reading, did you start with the first one or with Slow Horses?
I did. I started with Slow Horses. I got a couple of chapters in. I was like, yeah, this is interesting. I kind of like the concept. You know, this idea of people who are misfits and screw-ups. But I don't know, it just didn't grab me. And I go through these phases where if a book just doesn't, if I'm not to a point where I can't imagine stopping, where I have to I have to make myself stop because it's 1 a.m, or I have to make myself stop because I actually have a job that I need to do.
Yeah.
Then I kind of just go and walk away from it. And that's something maybe that I need to work on. Just saying, stick with things. I think maybe that may be a culture, or a consequence rather of our culture, where everything is kind of instant gratification sound bites, and you don't have to work for anything. But that's sort of what I got, and I just sort of kept putting it down and walking away and going. But again, people kept recommending it.
But to that point, there are so many books out there. Again, we're a similar age. I'm envious of the likes of Jason King and others that were reading these books in the 60s and 70s. I find myself going back to those old school spy thrillers, and then you've got the 2025 was a bumper year. I had to pick 5 for 5books.com, which is a great website I recommend everyone check out. And I really struggled. I had to kind of do what you're doing here and say, okay, well, I'm just going to make it standalones, because there were some great ones out there. So there's always playing catch up. So I think you're right to have a rule and just say, look, I've given it 50 pages or 70 pages. I mean, don't give it 2 or 5, whatever. But
right.
Have a good go at it and then go, I respect the author, but it's not for me, and move on. Unless, I think for me, and it was interesting you bring your observation with Slow Horses, because it is something I have read a great deal of in the Spybrary community, which everyone should go join. It's at spybrary.com /community. There were a lot of other readers who struggled with the first one and would not have carried on with it if it wasn't for others in the community saying, yeah, we get that. The first one, it's kind of set in the scene. Stick with it. There is a payoff. I didn't have that experience because so many people I know recommended it, and I was lucky when I got there. I think there were already 3 or 4 books that were out, so I was able to fly through them, and I enjoyed them for that reason. But you're not the first to bring up Slow Horses. Was a bit of a tricky read. Yeah,
interesting. Because then I moved on to the second book and the third book, and I, like you said, just flew through those.
Yes.
But I will tell you, I had a similar experience with the Silent Hours. I tried to read it twice and kind of I don't dislike it. It's just not grabbing me. And I'm like, but
did you mean the Secret Hours?
Oh, the Secret Hours. Sorry, the Secret Hours.
Sorry, you're trying to catch me out here. The Spybrarians are writing that one down then. That one.
Yeah, sorry, the Secret Hours. For some reason, I have always messed that up every time I talk about that book.
Do you know how many times I've said Peacock and Sparrow got them the wrong way around? So sorry about that.
And one day again, I was like, I'm determined to like this book.
Yeah.
And it just clicked, and I loved it. And I almost changed my pick for this one and just made it that one. But like I said, I think the whole series is phenomenal.
For the 1 or 2 listeners who've never read Heron, how would you describe his writing style?
So one of the things I like about him is I think he is unique in that he is sort of that same, like we've been talking about with the modern Le Carré cerebral stuff, but he is also very funny in a dry, witty way that I really appreciate. He lays stuff out in a way that you read it at first and you go, I don't even know what you're talking about, but he's not spoon feeding it to you. You have to, if you stick with it, it will suddenly all fit together. And you go, oh, I get it now. Right. You start scenes in the middle of things sometimes and you go, what is happening? I don't even know there was no setup. It's just in the middle of the action. The opening of Secret Hours is like that, right? in the middle of a chase and you go, what is going on? Right. You don't necessarily get background on stuff, or it comes out later, but in a way that's just very engaging.
Do you have a favorite out of the entire series?
I don't think I do. I don't know. I mean, I strangely go back to the original one a lot. I like Dead Lions a lot. I like
Real Tigers?
Yeah, Real Tigers is good. All of them, really. And that's the thing. I think you go through, and there are some characters that are consistent, and there are some that come and go. There's some that I look back and go, I wish we got more of them.
Yes.
And then there's some that I go, well, I'm really glad we got this guy, who's new, or this character who wasn't in the original books. And in that sense, it's sort of like we were talking about with the slice of life of embassy life. It's very real, right? People come and go. Another of my favorite authors is Daniel Silva, and he has, I don't know, 30 books or so out now, and a lot of them have these same characters, right? He, when his main character Gabriel Alon calls his team together, it's the same group.
Yeah.
And you go, it's great. It's like old friends, right? Coming back. But then you sit and go, I mean, these guys all still work together after all. Nobody's gotten promoted, or nobody's gotten transferred out or retired or whatever. But so that's one of the things I like about the Slow Horses, is that people come and go. Characters die. It's okay. Even though you liked that character, they left, they died, they retired, they whatever, and new ones come along.
But that's a great question that we should ask Mick when he's on Spybrary next. Is there anyone he regrets killing off?
I would be interested to hear.
Not so much the storyline, but kind of like the fun to write. And he's like, I wish I hadn't done that, or they would be perfect for this.
Because I do think there are characters that you fall in love with, and you want to do more with them, and if you kill them, you can't.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, you can always go back and do prequels, I suppose, but I'd be interested to hear if there's anybody that you killed off in the moment because you thought, this makes really good story, and then later you're like, I wish that guy was still around.
And I get the feeling, I mean, he's not, shy to kill off his characters, but they serve the story. He's not killing them off for dramatic effect or like a soap opera cliffhanger, right? I mean, it all fits. And I would agree with you, to anyone who's listening, who's maybe watched the TV show and wants to read them, do start with the first book and work your way through. I mean, technically they're supposedly standalones, but a lot of the times I don't think you miss out on a lot of the backstory if you don't start from the beginning. And as Brian's saying here, stick with it. It does pay off. That series does pay off. And I think they get better and better for the most part.
Yeah, and I would say if you've tried Slow Horses and you just can't quite get into it, watch the show, right? The show is
great show.
I was a little concerned when I started watching and then reading kind of simultaneously if I was going to either spoil something, or I would go, well, I'm basically just reading what I just watched. There's enough differences that I think you'll be entertained both ways. But I think it does stick faithfully enough that I think that's what helped me with the first book, was when I got kind of in a slow part, I would remember what happened. Okay, I know what's coming up, so I'm motivated to press on. And so I think it is it's a very well done series. Each season follows one book. And I think they do a really good job. And of course, the acting is phenomenal.
Absolutely. And for those of you who've watched the TV show or read the books and want even more, I highly recommend Jeff Quest's Barbican Station podcast. He's doing deep dives on the books. He's interviewed some of the actors from the show as well. He's doing a really good job. If you just put Barbican Station into your podcast app, you will find Jeff's pod. So 5 excellent picks for your time in East Berlin. Want to move on. You're allowed a few luxury items here, Brian. So piece of music. So although we, I will set some context. Although we're setting this up as if you're behind the wall, it doesn't have to be pre-89. We're not that sticklers for here. We're just having fun. What would be your pick?
So can I pick an album?
Sure.
Absolutely. Okay. All right. So if I'm gonna be cerebral, and think like a spy, I'm gonna pick Miles Davis. Any album.
But
but yeah, Miles Davis, the slow jazz, real jazz, not smooth jazz, real jazz. But if I'm going to be totally honest, the album I'm going to pick is A Show of Hands by Rush. So if
Okay.
you know the Canadian band Rush, A
I
Show of
do
Hands, it's a
indeed.
live album from the 80s or 90s. I can't remember now. Um, I think I wore grooves in that CD with the laser when I was younger,
What was the name of
and
the
I
album again?
still love it. A Show of Hands.
Show of Hands. I
Yeah,
don't know if I've listened to that one, so I'll have to.
it's live. It's I think it's recorded partially in Birmingham,
Mm,
and partially in somewhere in the United States. But it covers basically the tour. If you know Rush, I'm going to geek out on Rush a little bit. If you know the band Rush, it covers the Moving Pictures, Power Windows, Hold Your Fire era. So that kind of 80s
got it.
music of theirs. Um,
So whilst
it's just
you're listening
yeah.
to Rush or Miles, what bottle of booze, if you want it to be booze, it can be non-alcoholic as well. But what would you like to have to enjoy
Yeah.
the music with?
Um,
And you're from
prob
Kentucky, right? You
so
have to be
yeah, I was gonna
careful, you
say
know.
I'm from Kentucky, so I feel like I have to pick a bourbon. My go-to is Woodford Reserve. Um, it's sort of a good it's a little bit higher class, I think, than some, but it's not something that's you're gonna have to mortgage your house to buy. Um, I just had my brother-in-law and I like to share recommendations, and at Christmas he brought a bottle of Weller over that was very good as well. But if I'm in Europe and I can pick something European, a good Scotch. When I was in Scotland, I went to a little town in the Highlands called Tomintoul.
Hmm.
And there's a little distillery there, and I sampled some of their Scotch and really liked it. Brought a bottle home, and it's not one I'd ever heard before, but I really like it. It's not
What's
anything
the name
fancy.
of
It's
it?
not Tomintoul.
Tom and Tool.
Yeah, it's
I'm
not
not familiar with
Lafroig
them either.
or
Yeah.
any of those sort of more well-known Scotches, but
Yeah.
it's really smooth. I like it a lot.
Fantastic. What about a luxury item? So we're allowing you to take something.
Gosh, I don't know. I'm not a big luxury item guy.
Bear
I
in mind, when we
guess,
say luxury, I mean, we're
yeah,
talking about you're in East Berlin, right? Where there's not
yeah,
many,
yeah,
you
yeah,
know, soft toilet paper would be a luxury there.
yeah. Well, I would definitely like that. I don't know. I used to. This is something I would never buy for myself because I can't justify spending the money. But I used to. I just wear like a Fitbit Apple Watch now, but I used to really like those kind of nice diver watch
Mm,
chronographs. And so, yeah, if somebody's going to donate to it, I'll take a Tag Heuer or a really nice, cool stainless steel kind of watch. But
got
it's
it.
something I would, even if I had the money, I wouldn't.
Yeah. Hey, but you can
I
request
could
it
find
there. The
other
government
things to
are
spot.
allowing you to
Yeah,
have
yeah.
something. So,
If His
yeah,
Majesty's government wants to foot the bill, I will take it.
there you go. Now, the doors are being hammered at. You've been rumbled. You got to escape. We can fix you up with any spy, fictional or from the real world. Who do you want us to come to send to get you out of East Berlin?
Jackson Lamb.
Okay. Why Jackson?
I think he is a guy, he's the anti-James Bond, right? I think he's a guy who he comes across as being extremely crude, you think he's in charge of these misfit idiots. Yeah, how good could he be? But every piece of knowledge you get out of him throughout those books leads you to believe that he is probably the most capable operative in the history of British intelligence. He just, and he's a guy that I think he's in the position he's in because he just doesn't care.
Yeah.
He doesn't care about getting credit. He doesn't care about getting blame. He just wants to get the job done, and he doesn't play the games. He doesn't go in for the politics. And so I think he's a guy who could get me out of danger in a hurry.
Plus, he's a good pick because he spent a lot of time in Berlin
Yeah.
during his career. So he will know those back streets of Prenzlauer Allee and East Berlin, and probably knows the spy who's going to come and knock the door.
Yeah.
Sort them out. A good pick. Out of the 5 books you've picked today for your Dead Drop 5, if you could only take one of those with you to East Berlin, which would be the one you'd take?
Gosh, man, I take one. I think I'm going to go with Peacock and Sparrow.
Why that one above the others?
I think, well, one reason I think I've only read it once all the way through.
Mm.
And so the others I've all read multiple times. No, well, I guess not the Slow Horses books. I've only read those once each too. But, and so I think it's one that I would like to delve into again, because I think I'd get even more out of it the second go round.
Set in a warmer climate too, which would be handy and great.
Yeah, that's always nice too. I will say that I tend to pick the book I'm reading at the time based a lot on the weather.
Yeah.
In the winter time, I can get into Russia and Germany and Scandinavia. But in the summertime, I really don't want to read about someplace cold. So when it's really warm outside, I'm on a beach. Bahrain sounds nice.
And finally, who would you like to hear next on Dead Drop 5?
Man, gosh, if I can just pick, I would love to hear from Dave McCloskey.
There we go. We shall see if we can make that happen.
Yeah, I think
he's actually coming on soon to discuss the Persian with Tim Shipman. But so he's busy with his UK book launch. Which
I was gonna say, I'm sure he's a busy guy. He has his own podcast too, but I think he's a neat guy. I'd like to hear his thoughts.
Yeah. Well, let's see if we can make that happen. An excellent pick. Well, Bryan, thanks a million for coming on and sharing your Dead Drop 5 with us. I know it's an arduous task to sit down, and I'm sure if I asked you for this next week, you'd have another 5.
I'm sure I would. Right now, I'd probably have another 5. So,
and really excited to hear your interview with Dave Goodman. Really excited to share that with the community and many more of those, hopefully throughout the year.
Yeah, I'm excited.
Excellent. And as I say, if you've enjoyed today's episode, drop us a like, a comment, subscribe. And if you're listening via podcast, it would help us out massively if you could drop us a rating and review. And until next time, take care of yourselves. This is Shane signing out for Spybrary.